Hey guys, this is my second video going over how to remember some translocations for the malignant fatty tumors, which are your liposarcomas. In my first video, I went over the benign fatty tumors, so if you haven't watched that one, watch that one first. As I mentioned there, I just hate having to memorize things, so the way my brain works is that it has to see something or visualize it or imagine something for me to remember it. So a lot of these are just really silly ways to kind of picture things, but a lot of them are actually helpful as to remembering the key features that are present in these entities. So let's get started. We're going to look, starting off with your atypical lipoma or your well-differentiated liposarcoma. So these are kind of the same thing on a spectrum. Often, if these tumors do go into a high-grade tumor, they go into this dedifferentiated liposarcoma. The other high-grade liposarcoma is your pleomorphic liposarcoma, and that's the one we're going to go over at the end. And then there's another spectrum, this myxoid and round cell liposarc, that we're going to sandwich in there. So starting off, we have our atypical lipoma / well-differentiated liposarcoma. As the name implies, well-differentiated means that you have things that look like mature fat going on. But what's different about this is that they're fibrous septa, like these pink collagenous bands that kind of creep through the fat, which normally, if it's fat, it's just a whole bunch of round vacuoles that are completely cleared out. So having this increased fibrous septa, some cells can be a little bit more pleomorphic or angulated, but overall, there's not a whole lot of lipoblast or anything because this is very well differentiated, meaning it's a mature tumor. The key thing, as most pathology residents know, kind of the buzzword, if you're thinking liposarc, they'll always do an MDM2 test. So MDM2. So, as we can see here, the way that I like to remember it, if it's not a knee-jerk reaction already, is that we have M, and then I gotta do D, and then the A, and 2. So MDM2. And I'll show you a different way once I go over some of these other things, and that's an amplification here. Amplification. Another name that MDM2 goes by is the CDK4, so if you see that, it's the same thing. Now, going beyond MDM2, what MDM2 is actually on is it's on chromosome 12, and this is chromosome 12q. So actually, I'll do a different color. It's a 12q, and just how I did in the other videos, I like to put the numbers or kind of hide it in there. The 12 I put up here, 12. And then here I just put a Q, 12Q. Another thing that's really high yield about these entities is that there's this molecular ring chromosome or giant cell chromosome. Basically, if they show a picture that looks like this, it's kind of forming a ring, maybe not all the way, but almost horseshoe shaped. This is your chromosome pattern, my little scribble of it at least. So if they show anything like that, they're talking about this entity. So over here, I like to do that with their M. I just create that into this ring chromosome. So giant cell. Another thing, so if you, I don't know how in depth they'll do this on boards, but it's 12Q and then it's from 13 through 15. So the way to remember, I think it's just knee-jerk reaction now, but 12 and then 13, 14, 15, and then I'm going to skip ahead, but we're going to come back to this. The next number is 16, so I always kind of associate that, and in my brain, however jumbled up it is, it kind of sticks. So this is 13 through 15, and then the myxoid has 16, the number in it. So as I mentioned, if the tumor or if this entity is going to get high grade or get uglier, it's going to de-differentiate. So this well differentiated is going to go and become de-differentiated. And looking a little bit more at the de-differentiated, just quickly, this is basically where you have your well-diff liposarc, and then you have your high-grade spindled cell area, which is the sarcoma aspect of it. This is associated with a 1P 6Q, and I don't know how high yield this is. The 1P associated with ASK1, and then 6Q is with this JUN, so I like to think of it as June, which is the 6th month. So that's how I remember that. And the ASK part, because my handwriting is so sloppy and definitely a typical doctor's handwriting, I can kind of ask in there. So ASK1. And that's a co-amplification of both of these. It's 1P and 6Q. Just to quickly mention about a couple more things about atypical lipoma, well-diff liposarc. Typically, your atypical lipoma is going to be in your, like, deep in an extremity, oftentimes kind of leg area, and it doesn't usually progress to the de-differentiated liposarc. And it's rare that they would recur once it's resected. On the other hand, your well-differentiated liposarc is commonly in the retroperitoneum, or sometimes around the spermatic cord. These are kind of areas where, if it's in this location, you'd favor well-diff liposarc. And these will, or are more likely to progress to your D-diff liposarc. And anything else that I need to mention before I move on? I don't think so. Okay, so yep, that was it for that one. Now, we've looked at the D-diff and how it was the 1P 6Q ASK1 June. So now we're going to switch and look at the myxoid round cell liposarcoma. So this is on a spectrum where you have the myxoid. You guys know the typical pattern when we say myxoid, it's very bluish and kind of loose. If I'll put a picture on here during my real lecture, but this is just going over the translocation. But here, myxoid, so I like to just first, I don't know if this is blue, but we have myxoid being bluish, and it's on the same spectrum as your round cell. We can see here that we have translocation. There's two different translocations. This top one is 1216, and this is the most common. It's like 95% of your translocations. And then this bottom one involves your Ewing sarcoma gene, EWS, which is on chromosome 22. That only represents 5%. So the big one to note is this 1216. So as you can see here, this is the 16, and this is FUS is the gene that it's associated with. I like to think of a 16-year-old being really fussy about, like wanting to drive a car or something, just a fussy 16-year-old. Let's see, where do I do the 16? I think, yeah, I just remember it being there. And then in my brain, I already remember the Ewing sarcoma, or EWS, being 22. So that's already there. Then what I like to do is that there's a round cell. So we can see there's 12s over here. And both of these 12s represent this CHOP gene, which is also referred to as the DDIT3. So it's your DDIT3. Now, in terms of it being round cell, this is the round aspect of it. Round cell, kind of like that. And oftentimes if you're looking at it on H&E, there's all these little microcysts. So that's one way that I like to kind of remember that, is that this, just drawing round makes it so that it's microcystic. So microcyst, and the fact that the cell is round. Then I like to use this CH to remember that there's chicken wire vasculature or blood vessels there. Those are good buzzwords. What else is there for this one? Chicken wire vessels, round cells. Oh, one thing to note that this is on about the spectrum being the myxoid and round cell is that if it's over 5% round cell component, it has a worse prognosis. These often present in your extremities, like the thigh. If it's important that if this is in the retroperitoneum, do not think that this is, well-diff liposarc or something. Look at the morphology, and what could happen is that the thigh mass or the peripheral primary had metastasized to the retroperitoneum. So keep that in mind, that if this is in the retroperitoneum, that you should probably tell the clinician to look for, like in the leg, in the thigh area, and see if there's a tumor there. Let me just quickly look over here, make sure nothing else to mention for that. Yeah, okay, so I think that that's it for the myxoid round cell liposarc. If I think of it anymore, then I'll come back. Then we have our pleomorphic liposarcoma. That's one thing. So these round cells, you can see lipoblast here in this entity, but the one that you see a lot of lipoblast are going to be this pleomorphic liposarcoma. And in the previous lecture, I kind of went over the lipoblast, how if you're a blast and you keep proliferating and it's a fat cell, it just keeps trying to make all these fat globulates that fill up the cytoplasm. And as it proliferates, the nucleus ends up getting indented by the fat cells. So what you'll see is that there's going to be like this really squished looking nucleus, and it can be very ugly, where you have really large cells, just ugly prominent nucleoli, and then it can be next to this smaller, more normal looking cell. So look for your lipoblast and look for that pleomorphism. This is the most aggressive liposarcoma, and this also can present in your retroperitoneum or in the thigh being more commonly affected. As it is so aggressive, oftentimes you can have metastatic disease and recurrence even if it is resected. And this does have a very complex karyotype, so there's tons of locations, so you don't really have a specific one to memorize that I know of, at least. Okay, so I think that's just going to wrap up the malignant fatty tumors, or the liposarcomas. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know. Thanks.